So, as I said, I'm sort of torn in three directions. One is to be a teacher and give you a historical background to the Civil Rights Trail, which I want to make sure everybody knows about because it's kind of new and is an official project of the Parks Department and the Smithsonian and all of our best institutions. The second one is, because you know Brenda, she's my sister, we had a wonderful personal visit, a little bit on the trail, not the whole thing by any means, but we have some photos of us standing around and enjoying the wonderful weather in South Carolina that we had in November and at the different memorials and such. And then the third one is that, politically speaking, this is a very charged subject, I think, in our present political situation. There's connections between how the 1619 Project and being woke and critical race theory and proposing to either understand or cover up the history of our country, where it's a little bit difficult to stomach, is in play. And I have a lot to say about that too, and how it connects, but that's more than we can do today. So I'll sort of go a little bit between each one, and you can guide me a little bit if you would like.
You need to share your screen. You lost the share screen.
It says connecting.
Uh-oh.
Oh, it's like the internet is weak.
Oh, great. Wow.
I got a message that says the internet connection is...
Let me get up. Oh, hey, Jim. Can you hold that for me for a second?
I'm on the guest
filming.
Wi-Fi.
Oh, okay. There you go. Let's see.
It's showing me that it's on.
Okay. And where are we on? Where's the Zoom? Here's the Zoom down here.
Is the other account stronger?
Yes.
Murray Grove. But that needs a password. A password?
I think that's the password that's on the base of the computer.
Where's
Let's do desktop.
John, here's the password is over there. We're gonna change the connection? Alright, because you have to go out and come back in. What is it, is it the home?
Sarah, you better take him off this host because you're gonna lose everybody.
Right.
So this whole thing?
This is the pin.
Mate, just take him off this host.
I'll have to do, okay, hold on.
Sorry, y'all.
Gotta get on the Zoom.
Yes.
We lost your presentation. Show your presentation. Right here. That's the Zoom.
But that's okay, because then I can do.
There's a gas main you can come up under the other. Yeah. The other, where it goes, there's another way to come in.
I'd rather he just bring it. I think he should just bring it and show the pictures with it.
Move that out, okay?
I'll sneak behind you.
Thank you,
It's
sir.
like two audiences. And yeah, and I'm also leave these guys up here. It's nice seeing their face too. Okay, so this is called First Steps Along the Trail because it's just a very beginning of a journey that I hope we can continue. The Civil Rights Trail is an official program of the U.S. government and of the National Park Service. There's a great website full of resources and maps, more than you could ever imagine. The history really started out not that long ago. President Obama was a key figure in this establishment, and the basic idea was to mark areas around the country that had significance in the civil rights movement in the United States. And there are a lot of them, and there are some that are officially on the national site. There are some that are on state sites. There are some that individual cities have worked on, Tuscaloosa, and et cetera, et cetera. So among historians and people who want to know this history, it's a lot more approachable and visible than it was just 10 or 20 years ago. There are also those people who may not be as eager to have some of this shared, and at times you feel that tension. And the Dalai Lama gets a little credit for giving the idea in terms of when he was visiting the US and with President Obama, and many of the state governments cooperated in establishing the sites that there are. And there are, along the routes, lots of efforts, as I said, among the different states, cities, and you'll see that not all of the sites necessarily are in the South. Some of the official ones are, of course, but you'll see that there are things going on in all different parts of the country. And if you're hungry for facts or practical information, and you know, you can do this tour from home. This is one of the great things about Zoom and our computer age, is that, you know, these places have presentations you can do at home for school projects as well. But if you're able to actually do a trip, there's an unbelievable number of books that have come out. This is all within the past 10 years, 8 years. Virtually, you know, none of this kind of coordinated effort occurred until about that time. So it's a huge effort to think that anyone is going to be at all of these sites, and you certainly don't have to be, but each one adds a certain amount of the story. Even Spotify has a playlist, an official playlist of the Civil Rights History Trail.
Wow.
I'll make this one a slide if anybody wants a copy of it. It's a pretty neat playlist of important songs. A lot of the black early rock and roll folks, I'm not a big knowledgeable person on that, but I've noticed in listening to this, they had a lot of songs that were not their hits, that were very black culturally, and that actually were kind of stinging. And they never made it to the top 10, like many of the ones that we know of, but it's kind of interesting to know that those groups were faithful to their journey as well. So I'm just going to show you some of the places that are on the trail. And if I'm going too quick, let me know. But basically, you're looking at places that give you a sense of where this history took place. And if you are as old as I am, you can remember some of these things happening in your childhood. So it seems like it's not all that far ago.
Yep.
For younger folks, I'm not sure how they would look at it, but you're talking about the major activities in the 1950s, a little bit, in the 60s, and historians really think that the American experience of World War II really advanced the role of African Americans in our society in terms of the way they helped fight, and the fact that they thought that they demanded the same kind of response and help as veterans as their white compatriots after World War II. So some of these sites go back as early as the late 1940s. There were a couple little sit-ins in the late 1940s that I had never really heard of, but it didn't always lead to something big right away. So Memphis, Jackson, Mississippi. The Museum of Civil Rights in Jackson is the old Greyhound bus terminal, which was the site for the Freedom Riders. And the National Park Service has really invested a lot of effort in trying to save as many buildings and contents as they can.
That's cool.
Because again, this is not, you know, ancient history that we were talking about. So you're going to see some really wonderful efforts, and they're still ongoing, to protect these sites. And the bus stop on Montgomery, you have a lot of museums that have opened. And I have a little section coming up about that. Again, these are museums that mostly have been constructed and opened in the last 10 years. I want to get political. You said, I want to know what I'm thinking? This is a little bit of an eye-opener for those Americans who might not have been prepared to understand this history. It was also the time when White Fragility was written, and you know the kind of consciousness that we have as a country to this history that we really didn't have before.
Yep.
Through parts of Georgia, Savannah. It doesn't hurt to take a trip if you're ever able to. Maybe not in the heat of the summer, but in other parts of the season where the climate in these areas is so neat. Birmingham, Atlanta, of course. So, what has happened in the past 10 years is there's been an explosion of museums and exhibits that just did not exist too long into the past. The main one you might think about is this one. Anyone recognize it? It's in Washington. It's been open for about 2 years.
Yeah.
This is the United States official Museum of African American History.
Yep.
It's shaped like one of the temples in the sand dunes of Timbuktu. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Took a lot of time to raise the money for it. It was mostly private. When it first opened, you had to wait to get tickets months and months. Now it's pretty much easier to get in. For those of you who know Washington, I just wanted to show you that it has a prominent place on the Capitol Mall. Here's the Washington Monument. Here's Martin Luther King Memorial. We'll see that in a minute. Here's the reflecting pool. The Lincoln Memorial is right over here. And
Capitol's there.
it is worth saying, as you said in the beginning of the service today, there is also a new Native American museum on the mall, and funds are being raised to improve a kind of not so great Native American museum in Washington to give full tribute to all of the parts of the people who made up our country. This museum is outstanding. The stuff that's in it is incredible, from Soul Train TV show to some of the possessions of some of the leaders. It's lit up at night, and movies and stuff are projected onto the building itself. It is really a remarkable thing that really you should try and visit or check out the website, because again, there's so much there. And then you're looking at places, Montgomery, Alabama, the Legacy Museum, and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. And you're going to see, at times, some demonstration of slavery in the United States that is a little bit difficult to see. I didn't put a whole lot of those things in here. Here's a sculpture that is particularly heart-wrenching in a way. So there's always that conflict of feeling, how do you learn this history and understand it in a positive way that doesn't turn you anti-patriotic to the United States and its beliefs in the Declaration of Independence, but also does not whitewash it or cover it up.
Right.
And to what degree do we white folks need to feel a little uncomfortable with this history or not? And that's something that Governor DeSantis talks about, other politicians talk about. It's very much on our agenda table. There are efforts already in Florida and other places to prohibit the study of certain things. And I'm glad I'm not teaching social studies in Florida, because now social studies teachers can be arrested if they make their students uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a level of, we have to understand this. It's not fake, and it's part of understanding that this occurred. Black lives matter, all lives matter, but let's understand what occurred in the past honestly and move forward.
Yep.
And no one says that to me more distinctly than a lot of our black leaders today and black folks that we met during our trail. One of the reasons that I didn't like to teach about Reconstruction was that it was a total failure.
Yep.
It was one of the saddest parts
Yep.
of American history. I am emotional, and I didn't want to have to teach it, and I avoided it. I did the other term of American history and stuff like that because it's tough, but yet without fully understanding what happened, it's really hard for us to move forward. So these displays are both difficult to see at times, but also very inspiring. I've seen Rosa Parks, for instance.
Yeah.
But also in Montgomery, there's a brand new museum. Again, I have to say, this is a phenomenon. It opened maybe 4 or 5 years ago, where there are these symbolic columns for representing the number of lynchings that took place in different counties around the U.S. And again, not an easy place to visit in some cases. Atlanta, of course, is a huge part of the trail because of its association with Martin Luther King. His second son just died a couple days ago.
Cancer.
So only
Cancer.
2 of his children, his 2 daughters are left. And this, of course, is the family. His house, his birth house, is on the trail. It's open to the public. It's closing soon for a 2-year restoration, so that it can be opened into the indefinite future. And there are also exhibits there as well as his grave site. Greensboro, North Carolina is one of the places that Brenda and I visited. It's probably the most famous, not the only, but the most famous sit-down place where folks were demonstrating against the segregation of the lunch counters in the 5 and 10s,
Right.
which was a big part of the movement. And the sit-ins happened in several places. This one is probably the most famous one. And it happened in the Woolworth, and it was nice for me to see this Woolworth sign again. This is a current picture. They kept the Woolworth building, and that's where it's now called the International Civil Rights Center and Museum. And they have kept in place the lunch counter. It's the exact lunch counter in the same place. All they did was polish it up. The menus are there, the specials are there, the peach pie is there, peach cobbler from Winker, and it's incredible to know that you're walking in that very, very space. Mississippi, as we said before, is, well, I'd like to get to this area someday. We didn't make the Mississippi Delta, lots of tiny little towns, but places where important things happened. Emmett Till's murder as well as Jackson, where there's now also a Mississippi Museum of Civil Rights.
Cool.
Memphis has quite a few stops along the trail, both for some culture and for some music, but also for other things that occurred there, including the strike of the sanitation workers, where Martin Luther King came to Memphis to
That's where
support
he was
them. And that's, of course, where
He was-
assassinated.
Yeah.
Where he was assassinated, the Lorraine Motel, is now the National Civil Rights Museum at the Lorraine Motel. And this is, again, maybe 15 years or so. I actually visited there when I was in college, which was only about 4 or 5 years after the shooting. And they just had a wreath on the balcony of his room. Now the whole place has been restored and has been made into a museum. And lots of places around in Memphis as part of the trail. In Birmingham, the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. What happened here changed the world. A lot of cities have maps of the places within their towns that had certain things happen as well. Some bigger cities and even some smaller ones as well. This one's a little out of order. Here we go. This was a place we stopped in, Orangeburg, South Carolina, which is the campus of what was a black-only university. Most states had a black-only university after a while. Now it's all races, but it's still mostly black folks who are studying there. Here was a really horrible massacre, it can be called. There was a bowling alley, and it was the only bowling alley in the town. And the students there wanted to go bowling once in a while. This was after the segregation laws had been passed, but of course a lot of those national laws were not enforced in the South. So the students were demonstrating to say, can we go bowling? And the police shot into the crowd, wounded about 25 kids, killed 3. And it's one of the more brutal things that you can see.
About it.
And today, the bowling alley is still almost intact, and the National Park Service right now is still trying to get funds to preserve it so that it can be part of the historical park. Here's where Nikki Haley worked for 6 years in the state capitol in Columbia, South Carolina. And they have there a frieze, an open, I guess it's bronze, monument to African American history, right on the grounds of the Capitol. Of course, over here is a statue of Strom Thurmond. So this is a conflicted area.
I would say.
The whole idea of what Confederate statues were taken away in the past 10 years, that's another topic to talk about and to learn about. All part, I think, of the same discussion. One of the tour guides down there was very quick to say, even though Nikki Haley seems to me to be honest and sane, he said she only supported taking down the Confederate flag after the terrible shooting at the Mother Emanuel Church, and was opposed to taking it down before. But unlike some other places, the Confederate monument in this old picture is still there. I thought it was taken down. It's still there. But we noticed from a distance that it was guarded. There were 2 policemen guarding this statue, and I'm just wondering if it was or could be a site of continued protest, because most states have taken statues to the Confederates down, but not there in Columbia. But what a beautiful piece of sculpture is on this. And these are actually pictures that I took. They're just gorgeous. And if you know some history, you can see Harriet Tubman and some of the slaves at work protesting for voting rights, eventually graduating from college, and towards the end shows a kind of happy picture of the success of African Americans in the country. The right to vote. But again, on the other side, there's the Confederate monuments over here. Strom Thurmond is over here. The governor who works inside the building today is quite a trumper and someone who is fighting against some of this history. Who was governor exactly then, I'm not sure. But I know in learning about Nikki Haley lately, they said, you know, South Carolina is not the state it was when she was governor, meaning that it's even more
Repressive?
yeah, and I don't want to say conservative because it's not conservative. It's
Repressive.
It's interesting. Some of the places are not on the trail. They're in different places. New York has a couple of places. The Underground Railroad, upstate New York, had a huge role to play with Harriet Tubman at times, and even Frederick Douglass, even into Canada. There's an institute in New York, in Manhattan, that is trying to work with the new genetics that we have to trace the stories of families, which is really hard to do. If you ever watch Roots with Louis Gates, you know, when black folks are on there, they have a terrible time saying, well, we can trace you back to, you know, maybe slave in this plantation or whatever, but after that, we don't know. They didn't list names and stuff like that.
Right.
But with the new DNA evidence and tremendous effort, there's a lot of effort to try and connect black Americans today to their past, as some of us have done for centuries. My grandnephew got us into Germany in 1620, I think, you know, through DNA and stuff like that. And so, but it's harder for black folks. Kansas City, Negro League Baseball Hall of Fame.
Here you go.
Detroit, African American history. These are a little bit older, but certainly it's not limited only to the South. Here's Little Rock, the Little Rock Nine, and the fact that the governor stood in the doorway and said, we will not segregate the high school.
Right.
And President
Eisenhower.
Eisenhower was the guy who said, hey, state law, you know, no, this is in the Constitution, and sent the Army, the
Yep.
federal Army, to escort
Yep.
those kids, some of whom still alive, into school. And they were against folks who were throwing rocks and yelling and screaming at them,
Yep.
if you can imagine. Little towns like Farmville. This woman, Barbara, this was, what year was it she did this? 51.
Wow.
Before this was, the press wouldn't even cover this back then. But she led a walkout of a high school in a little town in Farmville, Virginia, that was just a precursor to the 1954 decision in the Supreme Court, Brown versus Board of Education. Harriet Tubman was just incredible. She was everywhere. Maryland, pretty close to here, is the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad. Visitor Center, it's really hard to know where to put a visitor center because it was scattered all over in different locations. They picked one in particular, saved some artifacts from that time, and that's an interesting one to visit. There are also other places that you can go as well.
It's DC.
Martin Luther King Memorial, I guess it's maybe 10 years old or so now. The first time that I saw it with Brenda, it's very effective, very simple. It almost looked Egyptian to me. I've been to Egypt with the pyramids, and it's basically, the idea is from, I think it was from one of his speeches, out of the mountain of despair, a stone of hope. So there's this mountain with a cut in it, and then from that, this part that's removed and forward is the sculpture of him. And along this wall with the fountain are some of his most famous
Speech.
quotes.
Yeah.
And then through here, there's some more exhibits and signposts. So it's really a pretty effective memorial. And you can look at it, and it can be, according to the light, kind of sad and dark. And then at other times, it can also be hopeful. But obviously, the work is not done. That was his opinion, and even probably for us today. Right next to it, we took the chance to go to the kind of new memorial for Franklin Roosevelt, which was important to us a little bit, where my sister, you know, is dealing with some mobility issues, so am I. So she has her walking sticks, I have my cane, and here's Franklin in his wheelchair,
Yep.
because when they first designed this, the planners did not choose to show him in a wheelchair. Most of the country didn't know that he couldn't walk. It
Yep.
was thought that you would be too weak to be president if you couldn't walk. So the press had an agreement in those days, along with the different affairs the presidents had, not to report it and never to photograph him in a wheelchair. And so maybe he's wearing a cape or something like that. Well, the National Handicap Group said, we're going to protest this. Show him as he was and show him as an example for folks who have different handicaps. So they added an extra room and made this sculpture and it added it to the plan. And it shows his wheelchair, which what he designed himself. It was a kitchen chair because he didn't like feeling like he was in a medical wheelchair. So he got a kitchen chair and just added the wheels, and that was his deal. And of course, Eleanor is just a hero for a lot of us, just an absolute hero. Then we spent a week in Beaufort, that's how you pronounce it, Beaufort, South Carolina,
Near Savannah.
because my grandnephew, who's in the Marines, was going to graduate from Parris Island. And that's why we reserved a nice cute little cabin for a week. Then his graduation got postponed, but we couldn't get the air money back from Airbnb. So we went to Beaufort, South Carolina for a week. Not a big stop on the Civil Rights Trail, but this is where we connected to Reconstruction, because there's no better place in the country to go to understand Reconstruction. And then the mind connects Reconstruction with the Civil Rights Movement and realizes how one grew into another. The Reconstruction is called sometimes the second founding of America. And then the Civil Rights Movement, maybe the third founding of America. So for a while, I mean, so we didn't do a whole lot of stops on the trail, but we stayed here, and it's a beautiful town in so many ways. And then just got into the idea of Reconstruction. The reason that this town is so special is that the North, right from the start of the Civil War, wanted a foothold in the middle of the South as a headquarters and a place to support the sea blockage. They wanted to block all the
Blockade.
Confederate ships from coming in.
Yep.
Beaufort was perfect for that. So they announced to the South, we're putting on an all bets off attack on Beaufort. They announced it. And all the white folks in Beaufort left. They just left their plantations, left their homes. The slaves remained, which was very fortuitous, you'll see why. And for the whole Civil War era, Beaufort was occupied by the North, which meant that there were no battles there, no destruction. General Sherman didn't burn it down,
Right.
and therefore it is the place to go to see an intact antebellum town. It's the only one in the country. Charleston has a little here and there, but this is a complete antebellum town.
Yep.
And then these islands off the coast are special because they were also places where the plantations were kind of isolated. And when all the white folks evacuated for about 15, 20 years, it became what's called an experiment in Reconstruction, where the freed slaves started to build their own churches,
Yep.
develop industries, work for themselves, voted, became members of the state legislature. It was going good until the federal government gave up on enforcing those laws, retreated in about 1880s. It was about 15 years, and then it all was taken back. It was all taken back.
Violently.
And it was interesting to me that I look at Reconstruction as being sad, but 2 or 3 black folks that we met down there said, "Really? You think it was sad?" Well, we don't particularly think it's so sad. These black folks said to us 3, and one of them was the head of this big foundation down there, the Penn School. You'll see it. And he said it was a stepping stone. It showed what could be done, what these slaves did in becoming educated immediately on their freedom, building communities, keeping their culture. So even though it was taken away, it was a positive thing. And I said, wow, you have to have a pretty big heart or mind to think that way, because I still don't. Because I look and say, what was the Civil War for? What did it bring about? It started the Jim Crow era, where if you want to get brass about it, at least when there was slavery, the owners had an interest in keeping those people healthy.
Yeah.
Where after they were not property anymore, you could just shoot wherever you wanted, or, I mean,
Lynch.
it was, to me, not a very happy situation. And then Jim Crow, and then up until the 1950s, the Civil Rights Movement, did things start to move forward again. Here's a black church that we went to on the Sunday that we were there. There are a couple of churches there that are so historic. This one was built by whites previously, but was sort of taken over when all the folks left Beaufort, and now it's one of the black churches there. And it's the one where in the graveyard, I can see a little bit here, and this was, I don't know how good you are in your Bible studies. You study the Bible in UU, or is that not part of the truth? Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. So this was a pretty neat experience for Brenda and for me. And in the graveyard in the back is an incredible guy named Robert Smalls, who was a slave. He escaped slavery. He commandeered a Confederate ship in the harbor and brought it to the Union side. He went on to become a member of the legislature or Congress. He moved into the big house where he was a slave, and then it became his house for about 15 years, 20 years. And then it was taken away, and by the time he died, I wish I could talk to him to see what he thought, because he was part of a forward movement that then retrenched, but he is very much known down there. There's parks and parkways named after him. And in addition, Harriet Tubman was in Beaufort, not as a lecturer, as a soldier with a rifle and a sword and big boots in the river, helping escaped slaves get over the low country stuff. Absolutely incredible. So right now, this church is trying to raise money for a statue of her in the town. There's many statues of her around, but there isn't any here, and they're hoping to raise money for it. And then this is the larger church that Black folks built for themselves afterwards, and it's still part of the, I guess it's the A&E churches that are important down there. So, you know, Reconstruction became the center of what we were thinking about those times. And the National Park Service said, where do we put the visitor center for the official Reconstruction monument? Hard to know. You could put it where John Brown was, but they decided Beaufort was the best place to do it. And an old fire station is the visitor center. And it's not very large, but there are components in different parts of the town. And it's a real place to understand what happened during that time. The Penn Center still exists. This is the head of this is one of the guys I spoke to. This was a school organized immediately after the Emancipation Proclamation to begin educating the former enslaved people. And this is a language change that I picked up for the first time, that calling folks slaves is kind of derogatory these days. The word that's really more true is enslaved. They were the enslaved people.
Right.
They were not slaves, they were enslaved, which sort of puts the onus on the ownership.
Yep.
And what happened here was just incredible. Lots of volunteers from the Northeast came down to the Penn Center. They were the largest contingent of teachers, along with others, in educating these folks. And because there are all these sea islands, what happened is that it kept them isolated. So it was like 20 years before the white encroachment came back to say, we're going to claim these islands and get them back to the way they were before the Civil War, which they pretty much did, except that it was indentured servitude instead of slavery. But these areas too were so hot and full of mosquitoes and stuff that most of the white owners didn't even live out here. They stayed more over here. So this was like an independent place that developed on its own to a point more than anywhere else in the country to show what these newly freed enslaved people were able to do in industry, in construction, in business, in education. The schoolhouses that were there, the tutors, was just incredible. And a church that they built there, slaves had built the church, and 2 years later, they were running the church. This is the only place in the country that this happened. In fact, it's called the Port Royal Experiment because it's in this little town next to it called Port Royal, which is where Parris Island happens to be. And it's an old sea and seafood place, good seafood restaurant that we went to there. It's called the Port Royal Experiment. If you go to YouTube or the library, you can sort of read a lot about it, all of the things that were made. a rehearsal for Reconstruction, the Port Royal experiment, the meetings, the politics, the social order, the education. This was an unencumbered Black community that started days after the Emancipation Proclamation, only place in the country. Here's Harriet again. So this is when she had her rifle and her sword. This is the Harriet Tubman Bridge. It's not particularly grand, but this is the creek where she led some of the freed slaves from the Underground Railroad during the time that she spent there. Just a remarkable, remarkable person. This is a little more contemporary. This is a guest house in Beaufort. It was the only place that Black folks could stay during the time of the Green Book, if you saw that, or during the times of segregation. And those of us who are old enough know all the names that are on here. These are entertainers and athletes who could not stay anywhere because they were Black. And this was the only place, and I think it was the only place between Atlanta and St. The distance was just incredible in terms of places that were actually safe and were welcoming to Black Americans. And then in Beaufort, in a place that's now has a farmer's market that we went to, good produce there, was old Fort Scotty, was it? Let's get in Camp Saxton. This was a Union, remember, no Confederates in this town. It's all run by the North. The Union grounds, parade grounds, their headquarters. This is where the Emancipation Proclamation was read first in the whole country and was in effect in the whole country. They received orders to allow Black folks to enlist in the Union Army. Only place, in the first place, maybe not the only place that happened. So right here on these grounds of what's now the flea market is this area where such enthusiasm, the former enslaved people sang the Star Spangled Banner. Can you imagine? And saluted the flag, and pretty incredible. We wanted to go to a plantation, and most of the plantations, I have to say, still are bordering a line between showing the wonderful lifestyle of Gone with the Wind and the beautiful gardens with the real history of what happened there. Again, point of tension. We picked one. Gardens were not great. It's actually owned now by the city or the county of Charleston, but they take a very frank look at what slave life was like there. There are still original slave cabins that are there. The tour was very frank, which didn't seem to be the case in many of the other plantations as far as what I saw on the different websites. And that's why we picked this one to go to. The Gullah people. These are very special folks who were enslaved, who were from certain parts of Africa, probably because this area was so isolated, kept their African culture maybe better than any other group of Africans who came to America. And they're very proud of that, still have religious, social, food, culture. It's not that unusual in the Black communities, but this one is really probably the strongest. The art that's there, the restaurant is there, and this is something to think on, they're very famous for their basketry in terms of the kind of dried grass there is.
Sweetgrass.
Sweetgrass, you're right, yeah. And they do some kind of reenactments, which can be a little dicey in terms of, am I trying to support this or make light of it? But they do it in a very serious way, and the strength of their culture is just incredible. And then we saw a little nature, the kind of trees, the hanging moss that's there. This was a place that was a former plantation. There was a brick path, and that's because there used to be slave cabins here, and there was a fountain, but all that was left was the fountain, the cistern, and the path that the enslaved people had to walk through to get some water, I guess. On the way home, we stopped at the Washington National Cathedral, something we had always wanted to do, and there too, they were going through a little reconstruction. There were windows in that church that sort of glorified or made to look like heroes some of the people, Robert E. Lee and others of the Confederacy. And it got to a point where the folks in the church did not want those windows to continue to exist. So just very recently, they replaced them with what they called the Justice windows, which show protests of folks during the Civil Rights era who were looking for justice. So the whole thing about the lost cause and making the Confederate leaders heroes for the people in the South and putting up the statues is something that the country is still wrestling with as well. Does this group have a good sense of humor?
Uh-huh.
Okay, if you don't, shut your eyes.
Oh,
My sister loves biscuits and gravy wherever she can get it, and other food of the South. And I have a part 2 and I have a part 3, but I'm sure my time is up. But the point is that I would say to Governor DeSantis and others, those who don't learn from history or want to cover it up may be doomed to repeat it. Those who prevent it from being taught might want to be repeating it.
there you go.
And that is a whole presentation in itself. Thank you so much.
Thanks, John. Hey, John, one comment.
Sure,
There's
no
a stop on the Underground Railroad
Yes.
in Paterson, New Jersey.
Yes, there is. In
Just
fact,
to share.
we looked up slavery in New Jersey, because slavery was legal in New Jersey
Yeah.
at a while, and New Jersey was one of the last northern state to outlaw slavery.
Yep,
So, yes,
thanks. Great presentation.
thank you.